So the podcast is off to its first event this week in Sydney, Australia at Mumbrella CommsCon 2023. And on Thursday, I'm going to be there with the great and good of Australian PR who all gather at this event, and I'm going to be taking you with me. My plan is, as I walk around, chatting with people, I'm going to try and persuade as many people as I can to let me record what we talk about so that you can be there as well and find out about this event too. I think events like this are always interesting because not only have you got people turning up to share ideas and to learn from each other, and so everyone's already in the right mindset, right? But also you get those more in-depth conversations compared to social media. So I think it should be really interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what I can get for you on that one, and I will play those interviews over the coming weeks on the show. So that's later this week. I'm not necessarily going to get it out on Thursday, but I will get it out as soon as I can because next week I'm off to South Korea with my work, so I will see what I can get from there as well, if there's anything that I can grab from there. By the way, if you have a PR conference or event the show should be at and you'd like us to cover it on the show, then do let me know via the usual LinkedIn under Richard Midson. That's M-I-D-S-O-N. That's M-I-D-S-O-N. Now, on the topic of travel, I was chatting to Maria Jordan from Fireflies Management recently about influencer marketing, and I think there's so much you can learn about public relationship building from influencers, not just working with them, but by seeing how they do it too. And when I was chatting with Maria, she brought up the fact that she was working with a family of influencers right now. So we started recording, and I'm going to play that in a second about some of the topics we discussed to do with that. But just first, one other thing I spotted this week that caught my eye. There was a really interesting article in a Canadian newsletter, The Message. If you've not seen it before, it's the-message.ca. And the article was called Kill the Competition, a guide to becoming an anti-hero brand. Now, you've probably heard me talk before about how I think it's really important that when you're creating an avatar for an organization that people can actually believe in it, that it feels real. The reason being that people don't react to faceless, godlike organizational brands. They react to things that provide emotional triggers that they can engage with emotionally and respond to. And this article was by Trevor Thomas, who's the Vice President Strategy at VMLY and R in Toronto. And it was really interesting in that it argued that the old idea that an organizational brand needs to be a good person who is well-intentioned and likable is perhaps a thing of the past. And he uses the analogy of TV shows like The Sopranos and talks about how flawed characters have connected so much better with the public in recent years, and that the old-fashioned idea of the likable character in shows just doesn't work anymore. People don't believe it. So then he goes on to create these several archetypes like the damaged, the cynic, and asks whether these should be the basis for an organization's avatar today. The point being that if people are tired of the good guy and they've just seen too much of it, then it doesn't work. So in order to build a relationship with the public, we don't just put out good news from a PR perspective from a perfect person. We put out content, stunts, interviews, whatever we're doing in this public relationship building from the perspective of a flawed character. Now, he does issue a warning, which I think is pretty right here, that it is certainly riskier to have a flaw in your character than being all nice. But the rewards for taking the risk could be far greater impact and far greater resonance than many PR people are getting right now. He points as an example to Wendy's, the fast food chain, who took a sarcastic approach on Twitter, and he gives some really good examples of that, how they roasted people who were following them, and it helped to build up a real momentum around it and a real character to the chain. It's an interesting read. I'd love to know what you think of that too, and if you've tried that approach as well. And I will link to that article if you haven't seen it yet in the publicrelationspodcast.com newsletter, which you can find at thepublicrelationspodcast.com. So I'll have a link to that, plus, of course, all the usual show notes in the newsletter each week as well. So let's talk influencers. Let me play this section now from that chat I had with Maria Jordan from Fireflies Management, where we discussed a campaign about a family of influencers she's working with. And she does she talks about how she approaches PR trips, what brand partnerships work with influencers. And as always, I will round up everything in next week's newsletter, and I'll add a few thoughts after the recording too. So let's run the audio.
At the moment, I'm actually working with an incredible family. They succeeded on YouTube, and they are now wanting to travel, and they want to really experience the world and really just educate their followers from all around the world.
So this is a family with a big following, right? Yeah.
Yes. And the great thing is they've got a very loyal following as well. So for us, what was really important is because they, as a brand, they're a family. So it was important to connect them with brands that resonate with their values. So, for example, if you have a family, you're not going to push them to stay at a hotel when it's over 18s only, right?
Yes.
Because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Being really targeted in that approach and ensuring that the content that they produce also reflects the values of the destination, of the brands, of the hotels.
So
So
what's
that's a
the aim of the campaign? What is it? You're basically promoting the family, or
both. It's
yeah.
both. It's creating, at the end of the day, we all need to create content, right? Because content drives more awareness, content drives more awareness for the brand and also for them. So it's important to create content and just to keep relevant and keep as engaged as possible. So in a way, it actually works better for both. Everybody benefits.
Mm.
It's really
So, but
interesting.
your client is the family, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it varies. So for example, some of my other clients, what they would want to do is partner up with the tourist board, right?
Mhm.
So the tourist board really is one of the best places because they have X amount of contacts and recommendations. But again, if you want more of a targeted approach into what your itinerary looks like, then you would hire someone like me that can really make sure that it resonates with your audience. It makes sense because sometimes, tourist boards and different brands, they just want to throw everything at you. And there's only so much you can actually do and see, right?
Yes.
So you
Yes.
need something to kind of filter through all of those choices and actually pick the best ones for you that obviously resonate with your audience.
So how do you approach this sort of thing though? I mean, are you sort of so you said I've got a family, I've got to pick the right resort, but it's like, do you look at their audience then and kind of go, well, this is the sort of thing they'd be interested in? How do you approach that?
Yeah, so I was quite lucky with them because we had an initial call and they wanted this particular trip. And I said, well, what kind of vibe do you want? What is it that you want to do? Do you want it to be an active holiday? Do you want it to be relaxing? Because ultimately for them as well, it is work, but it's also having that time off to just like switch
Mhm.
off from the world. So I think it's about finding that balance and just seeing what really works for them. So I was quite lucky because they just put their whole trust in me and they were like, you plan it. You seems like you know what you
Awesome.
want to do. But before that call, I actually put down a proposal of, right, you can do this. If you want to be really active, you can do bungee jumping, you can fly a plane. Like I was going crazy with the ideas, right? Or you can just chill by the beach or have a walk in the desert or keep it quite chilled. And what we ended up with is actually the really good balance of the two. And once you're there, we wanted to get them into some interviews. Well, actually, I suggested getting them into some interviews because, they have fans, they have a huge following in the Middle East. And it just made sense for us to organize an interview. So it was kind of hitting all of those points. And it really helped raise awareness of the country where they visited. So it really was a mutual beneficial partnership, I would
Were
say.
these interviews on traditional broadcasting, podcasting, new media, or where were they?
Yeah, so Virgin Radio in the Middle
Mhm.
East is probably the biggest sort of radio station in the country, and it actually syndicates into Australia as well, funny enough.
Right.
So that was a great reach, actually. And from that, I even had people contacting me left, right, and center on Instagram and on email saying, we want to have them here, we want to do this. So that's why it's good to have a
Fantastic.
middle person to kind of filter through those requests. And I mean, everybody was just incredibly considerate and kind. And it was a really
Yeah.
great experience. The industry name for it is a PR trip.
Yeah.
Although it might not be so relevant for this because it was more of a collaboration and it was a holiday for them. So it was more of a bit of both. But I think, yeah, I guess, yeah, I think an agency is probably quite a good way to put it. And it takes me back actually because a few years ago, I actually had a magazine. So I would travel all around the world reviewing hotels. So I used to be a journalist as well, funny enough.
Right.
So I've done it on the other side.
You
And
yeah, you know what's needed. Yeah.
that's where I have the knowledge of
Yes.
where we should go, how they should
Yeah.
work. I have the contacts with the hotels, with the
Yeah.
tourist boards, because I did that in the US and in Europe as well.
Yeah.
So I had that sort of travel experience, and I got a degree in travel and tourism at university. So it all
You
goes back
understand.
to circle. It goes back to
These
circle.
trips, though, I mean, I remember organizing press trips and journalists. I mean, we've both been journalists,
Right.
but we can be, how do we put this politely, awkward buggers at times. And it's like, I did not enjoy doing that. But I
No,
suppose from a PR
yeah,
point of view, it's probably a bit different. I mean, interesting, though,
yeah.
because as you say, the content marketing influencer market has changed a lot. What would you say has changed in that? Are there any things that people should be watching out for that has changed probably as a result of COVID as well?
Yeah, I mean, right now, although I'm actually planning a separate trip for somebody else in a few weeks' time as well, what I'm seeing now is because the skies have opened,
Mm.
a lot of the hotels experiences actually have limited availability
Mm.
to how they used to be pre-COVID, because now everybody wants to travel, right? So
Yeah, we're
now,
desperate.
yeah, so now the partners are becoming a lot more selective.
Mhm.
So I think what's really important is to make sure that your media kit, the media kit that you create for your client, it's really spot on and
Yeah.
it really resonates with the partners that you're pitching to. Like we were saying earlier, if you have a family, don't pitch them to an over 18 or 21
Mm.
result, because why would you? That it doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
right? So, or pitch a family to visit a club. Like again, that doesn't quite make sense for them. So I think it's just getting really, really, really tailored
Yeah.
and being very, very selective. Whereas before, you can just send one generic email and you'll get loads of responses back. Now it's not like that.
It's
Now
got
the
to be a
hotel,
clearer, positive, and directed pitch, hasn't it?
totally
Yeah.
100%. It has to be
Yeah.
as targeted as you can physically make it. And if you can even go as far as picking out a couple of things, a couple of different words from their website, just to kind of make it even more personal, or the recent press release, go for it, because it's going to win you some brownie points.
I think that's something I always used to say with journalism as well, is that if you wanted to reach me, relate to something about that I've said or done, make it personal. Don't just give me a generic. The classic was when someone would say, well, in the early days of radio, before we had all the internet stuff, people would kind of go, oh, I've got some video that you can use. It's like, this is a radio station. It
Right.
doesn't really matter how good your story is, then you've lost, you're out, because you've just shown you don't even care. And although as a PR, you're sending out to a lot of people, those people are still humans.
Yeah. And what did you take, actually? I'm very intrigued about that. What
Mm.
did you take about people actually going through your Twitter or LinkedIn and saying, hey, Richard, I've noticed you like, I don't know,
Well, it
dogs.
makes a huge difference, doesn't it?
But do you like that, or do you feel like it's invading your privacy in some
Not
way?
on Twitter, because that to me is,
I've had it both. So I actually reached out to a journalist because I was working on this really difficult pitch.
yeah.
I mean, it was as dry as it comes, right? It was just, I
How can we
really,
massage this? Yes.
I know, right? And I was like, right, well, I need to get really personal to build that relationship, like we were saying earlier. And I went onto his Twitter and I noticed actually that he has the same dog breed as I have. So
Right.
I thought, right, that's a way to get in there. So I was
Yeah.
like, hey, I noticed that you have this dog breed. I have the same. How what a small world. Anyway, we ended up having a conversation. I booked the interview. Another journalist, and it was actually quite a top tier publication in the US. Another journalist, also a public Twitter account, similar situation. And he said, please do not use my Twitter information to pitch it as a reference to your pitch. And I thought, why? It's public, you know? If
I
it's
think that's
private,
I
I
think that's a
understand.
journalist on a grumpy day where they're
Right.
just, yeah,
That's
they've probably had too much of that, or they've
right.
probably had too many people mention that bit of information that they're kind of going, oh, I'm sick of this now.
Right. Could
So
be.
yeah.
It's just
I mean,
interesting,
I
but
think,
I'm sorry with
yeah,
the person.
sometimes I wonder a little, because the easy ones, pick out an easy thing. I think, even with the podcast, I'll hear from people that are mentioning the same sort of things.
Mm,
So I think it's when you can, an opinion I think is also useful as well. It's like, I agreed with you on X.
mm.
And
Yeah,
also then as well, when someone's tweeting, it's also, I think it's useful as well when you are clicking like on their post at least a while before, or adding comments before you make that pitch, so
I
that it
see.
looks like you were, I was about to say genuinely interested. I mean, hopefully you are genuinely interested,
Yeah,
but if you're showing that and they can see, oh, hang on, that person did add a comment to my Twitter before,
right.
it makes it a bit more authentic.
Yeah, it's so strange for me because I've never been on Twitter
Yeah.
and I only recently joined. I was
Yeah.
literally thinking I joined. But I've been so lucky that up till now, all of my clients have been word of mouth. So I've
Yeah.
never had to, use a third party. But recently I thought, new year, new beginnings. Let's go on Twitter and see what's happening there. And I'm learning so much just by being on a platform for a
It
couple of weeks.
sucks so much time out of your day. I try to avoid it. I stick with LinkedIn. It's just you go on there, you don't come out. It's a
There's
hole.
so many opinions. There's a lot of opinions
Yeah.
on Twitter.
Yeah, but that's
It's
where, journalists do have opinions. And in the past, in the old days, when it was very much about you had to keep completely independent, it's all changed that now. And people are saying things. And
yeah,
even if they don't necessarily say, I mean, I've got a few friends who are foreign correspondents. And even though they won't necessarily go on there and say this war is bad or this person is bad or something like that, it's not hard to work out what they think just by looking at the
yeah,
way they write things or the pictures they show. So there's
yeah,
always stuff you can pick up on that. Gosh, there's
totally.
so much I want to talk to you about. You've got to come on regularly so that we can go through so many of these things.
Thank you so much.
So I think there's a couple of takeaways there from Maria. It was a great chat as usual. It's so nice to speak to listeners and to everyone that's been getting involved with the show. So if you've got a good story about a campaign you're currently working on, do let me know as well. You can reach out to me on Richard Midson on LinkedIn, Midson. But let's just have a quick look at a couple of takeaways. The importance of targeting is pretty clear from what she was saying there, of knowing what partners need. We were talking to Alexandra Annabelle the other week from Tech4Gs about disaster PR. And she was saying about the importance of working with other organizations to be able to get the overall message out there. Partnerships are powerful, whether it's just using someone else's facilities, in the case of Jordan is, like hotels and tourist facilities, or working together to deliver a message. But the importance of knowing what a partner needs. Also, that the content creator market is pretty busy right now. And since COVID, especially, travel is popular again. People are traveling. So venues and countries are being very careful choosing who they actually want to work with now. It's not just a throw open the door to every influencer anymore. They're looking for targeted usage of influencers for marketing. And I'm going to have more from that chat with Maria over the coming weeks as well. And indeed, from all the different people I've been speaking to recently. But let's get you on as well. I really want to talk to you too. In the meantime, I will check in with the show from either South Korea next week or from Mumbrella CommsCon 2023. In Sydney. As I said, be there on Thursday. If you're there, make sure you come up and say hello as well. Presumably we'll have some lanyards, so you'll be able to see my name as well. I will get you on the show, guaranteed, if you are there in Sydney on Thursday this week. All the details for the show, publicrelationspodcast.com, newsletter and everything like that. All you need to know there, and also how to be a guest on the show. And if you're interested in the Public Relations Podcast project that I'm working on too, you can also find the URL on the website as well. That's it for now. Have an absolutely awesome week. I'll speak to you soon.